And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on Monday, December 8th, 2025. And we have the weather pattern I was telling you about last week that's going to unfold and set up and be with us now through the upcoming week. We have had low pressure this weekend over the Gulf with high pressure building in out of the Arctic Ocean, northern mainland into northwest Canada. Created some very, very high outflow winds, the gaps there in the lower Mat-Su Valley. Palmer had wind gusts up to 100 miles an hour over this weekend as a result of that cold air drainage working its way southward. We still have some gusty winds out of Bristol and Kuskokwim Bay, but winds have come down in the interior mainland, especially areas of the central and western interior. Still could be some stronger, gustier outflow winds southeast mainland and down here across the northern half of the Panhandle. So for Tuesday morning, we have two features that are going to bring some IFR conditions. Low pressure in the Gulf. We have a low as of this Monday, later morning, afternoon, pulling up into the southern Panhandle, and by late Tuesday night, early Wednesday, another low will be coming up toward Dixon Entrance, Prince of Wales Island. So this is going to keep some snow going in areas of the Panhandle with the shift more toward the south. But for Tuesday morning, look for IFR conditions out over the Gulf and then up along the north slope. There's a little trough pulling through. They'll have some lower ceilings and a little bit of light snow up that way in the far northern mainland. Elsewhere, though, much of the interior, just VFR conditions and very cold. And looking at Tuesday afternoon, yes, we have some IFR conditions along the Beaufort Sea coast, just east of Utqiagvik through Kaktovik. And then we have the IFR conditions out over the Gulf and also a little pocket here, far eastern Aleutians, tip of the Alaska Peninsula. For Wednesday morning, find some MVFR conditions along the outer coast, and as we look up to the north, IFR conditions are expected there along especially the central north slope. IFR back here through the eastern Aleutians and lower Alaska Peninsula, and then way out to the west there toward Shimia and Attu. And then for Wednesday afternoon, some IFR conditions along the spine of the Brooks Range, and then generally MVFR conditions out over the Gulf with IFR conditions way out there in through the west. So looking at what we got going on here for passes on Tuesday, far north, Anaktuvik Pass, MVFR, generally speaking, VFR southern half of the pass. As you get north, though, you're going to have IFR conditions develop there around and just along the north entrance. Same thing, Adigan Pass, north entrance going MVFR to IFR on Tuesday. Areas further south and through the south entrance, VFR with Adigan, kind of a split, but again, IFR as you go north. Further south here, VFR conditions are going to rule much of the mainland across the Alaska Range. VFR, Lake Clark Merrill, Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, Isabel Pass, on over toward Mentasta Pass. The only issue is in some areas you have some very cold temperatures, so typical standard rule of operation for Alaska cold weather flying. And then Tanita Pass, VFR, Portage Pass, VFR, and even Chilkoot and White in the northern Panhandle, VFR conditions. But as you go further south, there will be some snow at times coming up into especially the southern Panhandle as we go through the early part of this week. Now, looking at the freezing levels at the surface, they've pushed all the way down into the lower Bering across the Alaska Peninsula, south of Kodiak Island, well down toward the lower Gulf and over toward Dixon Entrance. Freezing levels aloft are 2,000 and 4,000 feet in the North Pacific from Haida Gwaii to off of Vancouver Island. And then back here to the west, there is a area of low pressure where we have I shouldn't say that there's some ridging where we have freezing levels aloft a bit higher, 2,000, 4,000, and 6,000 feet over the lower Bering, especially north there of the central and eastern Aleutians. As far as icing potential, yes, on Tuesday, this area here in the southern part of the Panhandle, there will be some accumulating light to moderate snow, so above 4,000 feet, and those clouds could encounter some moderate icing. Up along the north slope, Beaufort Sea coast with that little trough coming through, little lower ceilings and a little light snow, could encounter isolated moderate icing above 2,000 feet, and then out here way out toward the far, far western Aleutians above 4,000 feet with a little system out there. Upper level jet stream winds are strongest coming onshore into British Columbia, Vancouver Island, Washington State. There's 140 to 145 knot jet core aloft. And then here we have ridging, high pressure ridge coming up out of the North Pacific through the central eastern Aleutians. And the circulation around that brings northwesterly flow. This is at 30,000 feet, 300 millibars, 65 knots over southwestern Alaska mainland, Alaska, northern Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island into the western Gulf. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, strongest wind fields are in the North Pacific, west and southwest of Vancouver Island and offshore there of Washington State. We have reflection in the mid-levels of that ridging out here over the lower Bering, but wind fields are not all that strong, relatively speaking. Behind me there is some stronger winds with a front here along the Kamchatka coast at 50 to 65 knots, and then coming in along the Arctic coast, winds are northwesterly around 25 to 30 knots. And then bringing it down to 3,000 feet, we find still some stronger outflow winds in the northern panhandle around Yakutat Bay. We have still pretty good, strong pressure gradient with high pressure sitting over northwest Canada. We're going to have a couple of lows heading toward the southern part of the panhandle. Not especially strong, but they will have some areas of light to moderate snow. And then back further to the west behind me, we find a stronger wind field pushing through eastern Asia along the Kamchatka coastline there, 45 to 65 knots. And for turbulence, there are few areas. Out along the Gulf Coast, Yakutat to just outside of Cross Sound could be some moderate turbulence on Tuesday, as well as along and just off of Prince of Wales Island to the Dixon entrance, surface to 6,000 feet. A couple of pockets of isolated moderate turbulence possible on the west side of the Seward Peninsula, east side of St. Lawrence Island, surface to 3,000 feet. And still, with the outflow winds not as strong as what they were over the weekend, there still could be isolated moderate turbulence out over Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, surface to 4,000 feet. And then finally, way out to the west, out toward Shemya, we could see some isolated moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet on Tuesday.